This review features unpopular opinions about a classic book which you may be fond of. Welcome to this new series from BookTube with Simon. As you all know, Room 101 began its life in literature in George Orwell's 1984, the room where the most horrendous things happen to you. And so we are inspired and reclaiming it for literature with Book 101. Now, Amy tends to like reading the classics a lot. I recognise them for what they are. Dull. And so in this series we have decided to read together a classic book and then debate it, and if I am persuaded that it is actually a classic book, then it gets a reprieve. However, if I am not convinced, it goes into Book 101 and is banished forever. We're starting off with Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, as recommended by Svea Schaike. I was speaking to Svea after she discussed it on her channel, and I said, well, if we're going to read that, we should wait until Halloween. And Svea said, no, now is the perfect time because of all the snow and wintry content. And to be fair, she's correct. It is perfect. We've just had a freezing cold snap. It is really cold outside, and it was perfect for the snow. However, unfortunately, I have to say that Frankenstein was extremely boring. Extremely boring. Because what happened, right, was this. You had about 5,000 pages worth of backstory, where narrator number one goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on about their childhood and their parents and their illnesses and all this kind of stuff and how they came to be on a boat. And then they rescue, obviously, Dr. Frankenstein, who then fills in his backstory and goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on about his Lannister-esque relationship with his not sister, and the whole thing is just really boring. Boring. It was boring. It was boring. And you're not going to be able to convince me that it wasn't boring.
I'll give it to you that it is very slow to begin with, but then when the action starts, it's quite fast-paced. It is as a bit of a slog in the beginning. I appreciate the double backstory point, but it's just how stories were told in those times.
This is my thing, though. This is what annoys me about people that call the classics the classics. Just because it was good in its day doesn't mean that it's actually good.
No.
I mean, a horse and carriage used to be the most efficient way to travel. That doesn't mean that we're going to recommend it to travellers now. Oh, you're travelling from Land's End to John O'Groats? Why not get a horse and carriage? It'll only take you the rest of your life. It's a ridiculous way to travel in 2020. Equally, there are thousands of books published every year with interesting characters and a good plot that moves at a pace faster than a decaying corpse would get in an egg and spoon race. So it is, they don't get bonus credit because back then people, had nothing better to do than to spend the entire day getting to the good bit.
I appreciate that, but I've like a full page of points to come back you on.
Go.
Because it is immense. So firstly, I think the writing style is just brilliant. It's not boring, Compared to the writing style now, how often do you get a novel that's as eloquent and as rich as a classic novel? Very, very rarely. The writing style now is just very much how we speak. It's very colloquial, it's very standard, whereas back then, like, they had all this diverse language. Oh, it just feels so luscious when you read it. It's beautiful. But
you're not going to get your cow to eat it. It's not grass. It doesn't need to be luscious.
I think it does. I think there's something to be said for that.
Well, Eleanor Oliphant had wonderful prose, and she was a crossword doer and had excellent vocabulary, and it was written very well.
Yep. And
She also got to the point.
I'm sorry, but I think Frankenstein gets to the point. He gets to several.
Yeah, but you've died of old age by this point.
Anyway, that's my first point. Secondly, it's written by a woman. Women authors in that time mainly wrote, well, I mean, you know the classics, they wrote romance. This was the first novel that was written by a female at that time that was really passionate and interested in science. It was totally revolutionary, and some would argue that she started the whole sci-fi genre.
And so, you think that we should adore Frankenstein because it is a female author
Yes.
breaking the glass ceiling?
Yes.
I would say you should hate Frankenstein for the same reason.
Why?
Well, I am pro breaking the glass ceiling. I am pro diverse authors. However, the problem is, back in the day, if the perception is, oh, women write terrible books, so we're not going to publish them, saying, well, here you go, here is a woman writing a book. Oh, and hold on a minute, it's like pages of Prozac.
I didn't say that women wrote terrible
Prozac's
books.
an antidepressant, isn't it?
Yes.
What's the sleeping pill? Is there a sleeping pill that begins with P? Comment below, because then I can reuse the joke in another video.
I didn't say that women authors in those times were terrible.
No, but that was the perception of people back then, wasn't it?
No, I don't think it was the perception. I just think that there were set parameters.
They were
about
dismissive
what women
about.
could.
Except they didn't think.
Aye, no, they were.
They didn't think women were capable of writing a decent book. Incorrect, but that's what they thought. So to say here's a terrible book by a woman,
I don't think it's
you've
terrible,
proven the
though.
opposite
But
point.
I don't think it's terrible. I think it was really revolutionary for its time.
I'll give it credit for starting a genre, because that's a big deal. You can't really knock someone for starting a genre. One of my favourite genres of all time is murder mystery, whodunits. The accepted first murder mystery is Murders in the Rue Morgue by Edgar Allan Poe. By far and away one of the worst murder mysteries I've read in my life. I don't normally give spoilers, but I mean, I think classics, we're okay to be a bit spoilery for classics. Do you know who did it? A chimpanzee! Like, that was the solution. And they didn't actually investigate anything. It was just a case of the investigator speaking to a few people, and you know, where were you on Tuesday at the butcher? Where were you on Wednesday? The Black Plague man was visiting. Where were you on Thursday? Counting stones, whatever they did back then. Well, in that case, it must have been the chimpanzee. Case closed.
Right.
Are you going to tell me that's a good book? No.
No, I don't think Whodunit with a chimpanzee done is a good book. But I do think that Frankenstein's a good book.
So what genre did she start?
Sci-fi.
Right, so she started sci-fi, right? Because this thing gets reanimated and...
She started science fiction, like, come on.
But...
It had never been done.
But what is the point of science fiction?
Well, it's to combine science and fiction.
To transport you.
Science fiction.
Just to save you rewinding, I'm going to show that a couple more times. Support you. Support you. Support you. The point of science fiction is to build this world that you want to, escape to and experience these things that don't happen in the real world. I just wanted to escape the book. I mean, we spent 50% of the book floating in a boat talking to a man. That's not science fiction. That's a terrible rendition of Row, Row, Row Your Boat. And so, just because she started a big genre doesn't mean the book is in and of itself good.
I don't think that science fiction always needs to be so pushed to the boundaries that it's unrealistic, though. Like, I think that this is science fiction realism. Like, you could have legitimately have seen that happening. Somebody being so possessed by the idea of creating life and having all these steampunky Victorian-esque tools to do it, running about in the dark of night, stealing bodies for graveyards, and...
But if you wait 50% of the book for that to happen, then, you know, what a waste. I mean, I could just, right now, halfway through this video, say, oh, by the way, this tea happens to be a portal to another world. But no one's going to say this has been a wonderful example of a sci-fi film we've just starred in. Because I've actually just been sitting on the sofa, you know, arguing about a boring book.
In your opinion.
Uh-huh.
Next point. The monster. So, by far, my most favourite character in the book. He's class. He's such a complex character. I think in horror he is so misunderstood and portrayed badly. I think that a load of people don't even realise that Frankenstein isn't the monster. Like, they call the monster Frankenstein, and no, it gets my goat. But he's brilliant and he's amazing, and he's just this wee genteel creature that this dude has brought to life. Like, he's been his pride and joy, he's worked so hard for him, and then he's just went, oh, but here I go, catch you, he doesn't bother his arse. Like, in this monster, although I feel bad for calling him that, like, let's just call him Greg. So Greg has to, like, learn everything himself because his father, essentially, isn't bothering his arse to look after him because he doesn't fit the ideals that Frankenstein had set in his head for his first creation. So he is pushing his own inadequacies, his own feelings of inadequacy and his own feeling of failure, and he's feeling like he's no managed to accomplish his life's work properly onto Greg, which makes for a really, really horrible upbringing for Greg.
How does that make Greg, in and of himself, an interesting character just because he's got a tragic backstory? He has a tragic backstory.
Oh my god, you can't put that in the video. You cannot put that in.
Yeah, this is a tragic backstory.
Any serial killer, but that's moving on to another one of my points.
Prince Harry has a tragic backstory. That doesn't mean he's interesting.
Well, I think that tragic backstories do sometimes make for an interesting character, because it's interesting to see how they then deal with that in their life.
Yes, but sometimes is the operative word, isn't it?
Well, I think in this case it makes for an interesting character. You see him longing for love, longing for affection, longing to be part of a family unit, and
so does the dog. But if we just wrote down what the dog did in a day, that's not going to become a bestseller.
I think you are missing the point.
But your point is, oh, poor monster has daddy issues. Greg has daddy issues, thus this is a hit.
No, I don't think that it's just the daddy issues that make it a hit though. It's about him and how he deals with it, like in getting a snippet of his wee life. And surely getting snippets of other people's lives are what novels are all about. Certainly for me, I'm very character driven.
Yeah,
maybe that's what the difference is.
No, but this is the thing, because like getting snippets of people's life is exactly what it's about. But usually it's not just, I got up in the morning, made some cornflakes, read the paper, went for a walk.
It's not! He goes on a murder spree!
Well,
like, let's not just make it like he's like, oh shit, Dad doesn't love me, let's put on a bit of My Chemical Romance, a wee bit guy liner, write some shitey poetry and have a wee sob. Like, it's about his internal struggle and the struggle, like, a morality and him learning about the world that he's in. And
but is it interesting to read?
Yes!
No, but like, is there tension?
Yes!
When?
I think it's quite a tense novel.
When does the tension start?
It just says that, well, did you not feel like the build-up was tension?
No, I felt like the build-up was boring, because every time you think you're going to get to the good bit, oh, tell you what we need, a bit more backstory.
Okay.
It was as tense as an elastic band 10 years after it's burst open.
I think that it's full of tension.
It's not full of tension.
Okay. Next point. So, Greg is just an outcast, really, who wants to be loved. And I dig that. I have such a soft spot for that, and I think that it's actually very, very relatable to the world that we're living in now. When you think about how fraught we are with social media and likes and subscribers and views on YouTube and, you know, viral posts and whatever it is on Instagram and such, you know, people are craving that attention and that acceptance for their peers, their community, although Greg's community was a lot smaller, really. But if you think about it now in the world that we're living in, think about how difficult it is for people when they don't get that acceptance and they don't get that love, because that's the world that we live in now. It's a very digital world, lots of it's online. When you think about kids these days, how online their life is, the amount of online bullying that's happening, real life bullying as well, when they don't fit the norm and they don't get that sort of acceptance for their peers. And I just think that this is a classic case as to what can go wrong when people are looking for that love and acceptance out with themselves as opposed to loving and accepting themselves. And then I think that if you take it one step further, it's not only a reflection as to what can happen in terms of your society today, but in the more extreme cases, I think that you can relate the character to Greg, certainly his backstory, to perhaps a lot of serial killers and stuff that are prevalent. You know, you think Ed Gein, difficult background, mummy issues, you know, these serial killers didn't get that love and affection from their families, they didn't get the acceptance for people in their lives, and then it's the whole nature versus nurture debate. And I just find it so fascinating that a book that was written in that day and age can be so relevant. And I know you're just going to go, boring, but I just think it's so interesting that you can read it and you can draw parallels between Greg and all these, all these real people and all these relevant situations today. It blows my mind.
So if I sing again and more people unsubscribe, I might go out and start stabbing folk.
Well, I think that that's an extreme reaction, but in some cases, like, maybe not stabbing people, but it can negatively affect people's mental health. And if they start struggling with their mental health and they go into a downward spiral, then that can happen. Sorry, I've just ranted for about half an hour.
I mean...
Oh, do we have him on the ropes?
I think you have a point. You know, when it comes to being able to understand, human psychology fascinates me, and for somebody in that time to have such a grasp of how people think and what makes people tick and to turn that into a story is very impressive, particularly a woman in that time. So I grant you that it is psychologically complex and impressive. So is a psychology textbook. That doesn't mean you're going to want to read it in the bath of an evening.
Worst things to read in the bath. Next. So the way it's written, obviously it's a mixture of letters and then retellings. Basically a conversation between the two people, and letters in the beginning, which again I think is interesting for a book of that time. Obviously now you have like Danielowski, who plays about with books, by J.J. Abrams, who plays about with how a book should fundamentally be structured. So I always like something when it's a wee bit different. And again, for its time, I think that...
I do too, but Bram Stoker did a much better job with Dracula. He actually used the different forms of writing to his advantage and used it to, you know, speed up or slow down the book and, you know, move the action about, and actually used it to his advantage. Writing Dearest Elizabeth at the start of a boring, long bit doesn't improve it just because it says, Dear Elizabeth, here's some boring bits.
I love that face. Do that again.
What?
You were all squinty. You looked like Mr. Potato Head for Toy Story, but somebody had put your mouth on too far
Just
round.
get on with it.
Funny.
You're getting sacked.
Dr. Frankenstein is the OG.
The what?
Unreliable narrator. Like original.
Alright.
So obviously we get his account first. where he basically makes out that Greg is like horrible monster, you know, poor me, I created him and I don't know what to do with myself, boo hoo hoo, I've wrecked my life, I've wrecked everybody I know's life, don't follow in my footsteps, kids. And he's doing all of this, but then when we actually meet Greg and we get Greg's sort of version of events, we find out it's really, really different. So I think that was the first time probably there really was such an unreliable narrator, because we're taking his word for it in the beginning and we're like, oh, Greg sounds like a wrong'un, like, aye, fair play mate, like, take your word for it. And then we meet Greg and it's totally different, so I found that to be very, very interesting.
I'll concede that.
Oh.
Yep, that's a fair point.
Cool. And then just the character of Dr. Frankenstein. Again, very interesting character, although I know you think a bit too wordy and should just get to the point, and I think that's a wee bit hypocritical coming for you, but again, a very interesting character. So he's very
If you would like to apply to be the next co-host of BookTube with Simon, you can do so by leaving your phone number in the comments below.
Are you just asking random girls on YouTube for their phone number now?
I didn't say it had to be a female co-host.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So, yes, Dr. Frankenstein, an interesting character. He obviously puts his entire life into his creation, and then as soon as he's got it, he's like, nah, it's not good enough. And I just find that interesting, because again, you can totally see that with people today, like they work so hard for something and something's never good enough, and they're perfectionists and they're always sort of in pursuit of this ideal that they're looking for. Again, especially now with social media, people are trying to get like the ideal lives, or make it look like they're achieving all these goals, but then when they get there it's sort of never enough. And in comparison to Greg, you know, the scene where Greg's just like chilling in the woods, living his own wee life, he shows so much compassion for the family that he sees. He realises that food's scarce for them, so he doesn't want to eat their food, so he doesn't eat meat, and he, you know, eats berries and twigs and stuff that he can find, and he's taken completely in awe by the world that he has been born into, and, you know, is just living in the woods, being a happy wee dude, had so much more happiness in that short period of time than Dr. Frankenstein had ever had in his entire life, because Greg was appreciating all of the wee wonders, and, you know, I appreciate he didn't have a very happy ending, which is sad, and I'm not in agreement with how he ended things, but I just think, you know, that parallel of somebody who spent their entire life, pushed everybody away just to try and get where he was wanting to go and get a wee bit of happiness, compared to somebody who made their own happiness, I just think it was also a great reminder to sort of just take stock of what you have, and like, you maybe will not have a hulking big monster cutting about the house, but, you know, you've got some berries and that's alright. So that was lovely.
To sum up and give my judgment,
yes,
it's boring. It's terrible prose. You can't argue with that. The prose is abysmal.
I think the writing's lovely. I think it's slow paced, very slow paced.
But interesting comment on human psychology, somehow timeless and prescient, and speaks to our current era as much as then. A reminder to appreciate the small things in life and count your blessings. An unreliable narrator, and it did spark a genre. So, taking all of these things into account, I am amazed to see I am not going to put Frankenstein into book 101. You get a reprieve, so it is safe from eternal damnation in the Book of Doom. Frankenstein gets the seal of approval. If you've read it and you have your opinion, let us know. Are we right or wrong to save Frankenstein from doom? And if there's any classics that you think that we should review and think are either brilliant or terrible, then please comment below and I'm sure we'll debate them again. Bon voyage!
Don't keep that in.